Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, all good.
Over-relax me with your massage now. I'm going to just talk about everything.
Guys, don't forget to put your headphones on.
You don't need headphones on, you dick.
No?
No.
Doesn't it look more professional?
No. I hate having headphones. You're in such a funny mood this morning. I can sense
Do you
it.
know what the weird thing was today? Do you know what happened to me?
We are recording, by the way.
Okay, perfect. So the weird thing that happened to me was today, 5 a.m. my alarm goes off. Normally it'd be like, ugh. And normally it is a real struggle for the first half hour. You know, my mind's kind of telling me all sorts of stories about how hard and difficult it is to be up. But today, I woke up naturally, probably 5 minutes before the actual alarm went off, and I felt so serene and so calm. And all day, ever since, I've felt on a whole different level of mental clarity, physical energy, playfulness. It's all there.
I woke up. My eyes, and I just said, "Daddy, Daddy!" And then I went upstairs. I said, "Good morning." She went, "Don't want Daddy." I was like, "Oh, for God!" We had such a morning, mate. We had such a morning. It's Aurelia's birthday tomorrow.
No way. My daughter's birthday was yesterday.
Yeah, no, tomorrow. And then, your daughter's birthday.
My daughter was yesterday.
What?
So basically, Mark, your daughter is 4 today.
Yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Damn it!
Yeah, you're struggling with this, aren't you?
God damn it!
But
Okay.
anyway, it's her birthday tomorrow, and the cake was delivered this morning, and the cake came through the door, and my wife was like, "Oh, we can't let her see the cake." And she found out about the cake, and for an hour and a half this morning, she was kicking off because she couldn't have cake. You know, that sets the tone for the day, and you said you set the tone really nice. Mine was the complete opposite, mate.
I was up and out the door before I had the chance to see my children and my family and ruin my morning. So it's all on my turn. Just get up and get out the front door. Don't look back.
I like that. Welcome back to The Secret Life of Dads with myself, Lawrence, and Mark Whittle. How you doing, mate?
Very good.
Yeah?
Sun is shining. It's a beautiful day today.
It is great. You're a very handsome man.
Oh,
There's
here we
always
go.
a competition against Lawrence. Because Lawrence is very handsome. Well, you're very, very handsome.
You're both very handsome.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Man crushing on you big time.
Yeah.
And
Big
it's
crush.
funny how your handsomeness is amplified by the screen as well. We can see the screens in front of us. You're good looking in the flesh, you're even more good looking on screen, which
Don't set the expectation too high.
that's kind of film star qualities that we're talking about there. Now, Mark, I want to talk to you. I've got 3 segments that I've got in mind for today's conversation, for today's podcast, if that's okay with you.
Whatever you want to do.
He's got
I'm
no
here
choice,
for.
really.
You're in it now. So to start off with, I want to talk about your journey. So before you launched your own podcast, wherein you were a full-time city worker.
Yes.
And I want to hear a little bit about the journey when the ideas were percolating about the podcast, your interests and everything were growing, expanding into the area. And then you started the podcast. At some point, you made that decision to transition from being, amateur to being pro and leaving your full-time job behind. I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk about life since the podcast. That's just the first segment, okay? I'm just getting started.
You're so prepared today. Can you be like this for every podcast?
Because we know each other. Cheating.
We do.
It's like 5 years of press.
We might know each other a little bit. I was giving a massage just about 5 minutes ago.
Yes.
And then the middle segment, I want to talk about when we met on the weekend and everything around that. And then at the end, I want to delve into the guests that you've had on your podcast, talk a little bit more about your podcast, lessons you've learned, etc., and go from there. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds amazing. I'm excited.
So let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning. You're a full-time city worker in the city of London. And what sparked the idea for you to initially set up the podcast?
Well, I'd had a period of time in America playing football. So I was exposed to podcasts there. So that's where if I rewind all the way back, we'll probably get into this, a bit more of this story later on, but my dad was a coach himself, which is what I do now. He's an executive coach. So he was feeding me the goal setting stuff and the coaching exercises literally from like 14 years old. And I had my goal setting book, but it was all about performance. It was about football, how I was achieving and the goals I wanted to score that season, all that sort of stuff. But it was still fed into me. It was the way I started thinking from a really young age. So that had always been a part of me anyway. Then when I went over to play football in America, I was exposed to these podcasts, personal development podcasts, Lewis Howes, Tim Ferriss, all these sorts of guys. And they're obviously at the very, very top of that game, which back then, it wasn't really a game at all. It was just people having a go and seeing what happened. And Joe Rogan kind of built that. But I loved that and I hated my life. and I listened to the podcast on my commute. And the short and condensed version is I had my version of rock bottom. I've been working in the city for about 10 years.
So you hated your life when you were working in the city, not when you were playing football?
When I was working in the city, yeah. No, the football in America was amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
How come you ended up in America playing football?
Well, I played football here, obviously, for ages. I played at academy levels in Northampton, Leicester. I never made it into the actual pro team, like the contract. So then I played at university, and then at university I met a friend who did a trial to try and get a scholarship in the US. He didn't get it. I went to the trial the year after, and I got one.
No way.
Embarrassing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, we don't
What's
speak
playing
anymore,
football
so-
like in the States? Because I bet as an Englishman, you go over there and you feel like a bit of a Ronaldo, right?
I was an absolute Ronaldo. Yeah. No, it was amazing. It was hard because when I went over, it was the Beckham era. So he'd just gone over to the Galaxy. So there was a lot of hype around it. And during the time I was there, it was the first time every MLS team had a stadium, which sounds so surreal for us. Like every team has a stadium, but it was a big deal then. So it was really rising in popularity, and the standard wasn't great. They're very athletic in the US, and all the emphasis is on that, not necessarily on like talent and skill. So it wasn't great as far as the playing, but the going out was fun.
Yeah.
And the whole college life was pretty awesome.
Is it like it is in the films, like with frat parties?
Oh,
and
100%.
everything?
Yeah,
Really?
but just a little bit. They don't show all of the...
God, I bet you did well with your dashing looks and that English
goodness.
accent.
So how
Jesus.
come you left? Were you chased out of the country?
I got injured. The classic injured my knee story. I would have made it, guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got injured. I came back. I also was with my girlfriend as well, so partly came back for that as well. And also I was brought up again with my dad as an executive coach. Although I was over there playing football, that was the dream. In the back of my mind, I was always thinking about making it in business, having a career in business and building something creative for myself in that world. And the money was obviously an incentive as well. So that's what I did. I moved back, got into the city.
So what sort of job were you doing in the city, and what elements of it started to chip away at you over time?
So it started as working in sales, Johnson & Johnson. And I was working as a medical sales rep. It was wild. Wild. So I cut my teeth in med sales. It was, you go into the theatres while they're operating. So you're watching these procedures take place and you're pitching products to them while they're operating.
Oh my goodness.
It's insane.
That's crazy.
It is wild.
What's the legalities around that? I'm surprised that you're allowed to do that. Or there are none.
There aren't.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really surprising because you're seen as the expert within the product. They're seen as the expert within the procedure, and you're there supposedly to support. Anyway, it was wild, and I'd never even watched Casualty. I hated anything like that. So I stood there, I was like, really good job.
Buy my product.
But I actually loved it. I loved the connecting. I love negotiating. I love selling, achieving, earning money. All of that stuff was awesome. I loved the competitive side of it. It fed into what I love about, progressing and growing and learning. But what I hated was the political side of business and promotions and managers and different styles of leadership. And that really started me on my journey of where I'm at today, where I just fucking hate organizational structures that don't allow people the autonomy to be themselves and figure out what's best for them and have the autonomy and flexibility to try things, experiment, learn what they're great at, and lean into that and see all that they're capable of. And you're so restricted within a structure and within an organization with a label as well that tells you who you are and what you're supposed to do. And it took me a long time to realize that was what irritated me. So I started at J&J. I did a few years there. I had a fallout with a manager. Shock horror. So these are the patterns that played out in football, in work. And then I went into a media company for a year, a little transitional period, and then went to Salesforce, which is one of the biggest tech companies in the world, working out of Bishopsgate, the Herentale, a couple of floors below the Sushi Samba, which everyone knows in London. And it was magnified. That sort of snake pit environment was magnified there, and that's where I really hit my rock bottom.
What does rock bottom feel like?
It's hard because I'm very sensitive. I wasn't suicidal. I never felt suicidal, but there was a period of time I remember walking my dog over Hyde Park. I was at one of the lowest I've ever felt, and I did have a thought where I said, I know why, how people could do it or why they would want to. I've never felt like I would ever want to do that. I've got too much to live for, and I love my life. But in my worst period, I understood why somebody might. I thought, this is so dark. I got goosebumps actually. I've not thought about this for ages. It was so dark that I did think, people must feel worse than I do because I've got a pretty good setup, really, so I can understand. And it's kind of just like it was helpless, and you couldn't see a way out necessarily. Yeah, I don't really think about that time too much.
They say that you know, you hit rock bottom and change happens when the pain of staying stuck outweighs the inconvenience of taking action.
Yeah.
So do you remember that moment, that time for you where you had an insight about, I suppose, you know, the creative purpose that you wanted to pursue through the podcast, and then started slowly to take that action, and then also practicality wise, how did that look like for you? Where did you start recording the podcast? How did you start getting it out there?
Yeah, well, so the sort of the penny dropped when I'd basically spent a year almost working towards a significant deal. It was the biggest sales deal that I'd done in the city, and it had caused me like a lot of grief. And because of the way that I was and the way I was wired at the time, before I'd done all my healing work, I couldn't trust people particularly well. So I did a lot of the work by myself, which caused more stress and more fatigue and more burnout. And I had 2 periods of burnout. And then, long story short, is I closed the deal. I reached the success that I wanted to reach, or that I thought I wanted to reach. And I felt worse the day after than the whole build-up. And up until that point, I'd always thought, once it closes, I'm going to feel amazing. This is what it's all been for. And I felt a lot worse because it closed, and the expectation of the pleasure that would arrive didn't amount to anything. It never did arrive. And it was in that moment I had this realization. I felt light actually after that. I was like, fuck. And it was almost this feeling of you're climbing one mountain and you look over and you're like, I've been climbing the wrong fucking mountain here. But then you don't know what the second mountain is. So I had a period of sort of adjustment, and the actual tangible in that moment was I just left the office, went to Shoreditch Market, grabbed a coffee, and was writing down on my notepad, like, what do you like about your life? And that's when it probably took me 90 minutes to even get an answer, but that's when it said the commute, when I listen to my podcast, is when I feel something uplifted for a period of time, motivated, inspired by the guest stories. So fuck it, I'll start my own. And that was it. And then the journey to actually building it was going into Tottenham Court Road, into Curry's, buying the Blue Yeti mic. Have you seen these? The USB plug.
I've still got one of those hanging about somewhere.
Yeah, so they're like, it's super low barrier to entry. You plug it into a laptop, and I'd carry the laptop round with the mic, and it was all only audio only at that time. And I'd go to friends, and I was lucky to have great friends who were building businesses and doing really awesome things. And I had Duncan Taylor, who's a close friend for a very, very long time, who plays at Saracens and played for Scotland. And then he introduced me to Jamie George. And then I was introduced to another close friend from school who has they're both influencers actually, but the wife has got like 1.4 million followers. And so within like 6 episodes, the podcast has reached number 1 in the podcast charts. And then my sales expertise took over. I was like, screenshot that, so cool. Send that to everyone. And then episode 20 was in LA with Ed Milet in his mansion, $40 million mansion, recording with him. And the rest is history, 6 years on.
Right, are you making notes, Matthew?
Wow, yeah, I'm making notes. I think it goes back to like, it's that creativity, isn't it? Is that an integral part of you felt like you were missing, like the conversations, the creativeness that you weren't getting fulfillment from in your own life? But it's weird. There's something about a podcast space. It's bizarre. I've said this before. When somebody sticks a microphone in front of you, there's almost this sense of vulnerability, and you open up about everything. And I think, like for us, when we started this, there are so many moments when I listen to podcasts and you get this kind of moment of like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I can totally get that if you're on a journey to work, doing a job that you don't want to do, but you get a spark of creativity from something like this. Yeah. So hearing your story, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, well, that allowed me to have an output that I didn't have, because everything that existed in my life was about sales. My worth was dictated by where I was on the leaderboard, how much money I had in the bank account, what suit I was wearing that day, in comparison to everyone around me. Yeah. And that was always under threat. So all you're constantly thinking about is like, basically, when am I going to feel less than? How long can I stay here when I'm going to feel less than? So the creative output of meeting someone and talk about topics I actually care about. In my coaching work, when I work with people, it's called following the breadcrumbs. So when you're in that period of rock bottom and you fucking can't see a way out, follow the breadcrumbs. Think about the things that do matter to you and do mean something, that give you a sense of meaning, sense of purpose. And for me, it was like, the podcasts are amazing when I listen to them. Why don't I apply my sales skills, which is just conversation really, to that? Speak to people who look like they've got it together. It was a selfish endeavor to begin with. And then the first episode was like unbelievable, talking about stoicism and all this stuff that I'm so passionate about and didn't have anyone else to talk to about. we were talking about stoicism, Ryan Holiday, all this stuff, and I was like, this is awesome. Second episode, I spoke with my brother who just rode across the Atlantic, and I'd never even asked him half the questions that I did when we sat down for the podcast. And then, you know, I think the turning point for me was Jamie George. He's now the England rugby captain. And I was like, if I can sit down here and have a real conversation with him, I can do it with anyone.
You tend to have a lot of conversations. Again, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, with a lot of, I don't want to categorize or pigeonhole, but a lot of rugby players and ex-military personnel, so kind of real men's men, if you will. Is there a certain type of man that you feel drawn to when it comes to exploring their character and their background?
Fucking hell, yeah, that's a good question. So, well, I'd say, like, as a person from the footballing background, and this is something I'm quite clear with in myself, and even who I work with as clients as well, it's this alpha, or at least perceived alpha person who's very driven, very ambitious, probably been in elite sport or business or military to some degree, because we're very similar in our ambitions and how we want to experience life, but we're also very similar in the insecurities that have probably driven us there. So, you know, we resonate with the humour, dark humour that you need in times like that, but also in how, you know, you're smiling at each other because I know you guys are the same, but also in the way that we want to live our lives and experience as much as we can. So, yeah, there's probably a lot more depth to that.
Okay, we'll come back to that later as well. So what I'm really interested at this point in the conversation is just that tipping point, that transition. Because I personally think that pursuing your creative purpose, if you're that way inclined, is an incredibly important thing to do to obtain the kind of fulfillment and joy in life that so many people are lacking when they're kind of stuck at the 9-to-5 grind. Yeah. So I know that just as you were at one point listening to podcasts on your commute, I know that there'll be other people potentially listening to this conversation who might be in that similar place themselves. And it might not be a podcast, but it might be something else that creatively they want to explore within them. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about that tipping point when you were able to transition and turn something that was maybe a hobby initially, although it sounds like it grew pretty quickly, into what is now your full-time role, which obviously supports the coaching and everything else that you're doing. What was that moment where you actually walked away from the full-time job?
When my daughter was born. Yeah. So she was 3 months old, and it was a burn the boats mentality. And I felt like there was such a tipping point in my life in its entirety. Even if I reflect now, it doesn't make any sense. But at the time, it was like, if it's being turned upside down already, just fucking go for it. Just fucking go for it in all aspects. So I was fortunate that 12 months beforehand, I'd written down, how am I going to exit this job? What are the best ways that could possibly happen? And it was like, quit, get fired, or a settlement. And I was like, well, which is the best of that? A settlement. So I know a lot of people talk about manifestation, but it's absolutely what happened. And I sort of, COVID happened, and my daughter was born. I was on paternity leave, and then there was a conversation to be had about coming back to work, and I put it out there and managed to have a settlement, which was really what allowed me to springboard and have some level of security leaving that world with a new mortgage, with a new baby, but with a dream of something which didn't exist at the time, because it was the podcast and it was lovely, and Take Flight had a great brand and I'd had great conversations, but I had no fucking money and no like view of where I was going to make the money. But then I was sort of forced into a position of having to figure it out, because then I had my daughter as well, of course. So it all sort of happened at the same time.
So you have day one and you sit down at your desk, you're no longer working a full-time role, you're a recent parent, recent dad. Sit down, Take Flight. What's going through your mind?
Guilt of not being with my daughter. Yeah, because it was really hard for us. Big identity shift. My daughter had colic and a milk allergy. So it was a really difficult first 4 months. And with lockdown, we didn't get the right sort of care and treatment. You couldn't really get in to see GPs and stuff. It was really tough. So you just think babies cry, but like my daughter, now I've got my son, I can see what a newborn baby should be like very peaceful, very playful, super happy, always smiling. My daughter had a really tough 4 to 6 months to start her life. And so there was a lot of guilt, because I could hear it going on all the time. And I was hidden away in the room trying to build this thing I didn't know what it was, knowing I had to figure it out, but also feeling so drawn to helping that situation. So there was a lot of that. And I'd just be like super honest, is probably a little bit of avoidance as well, because it's painful to be around it. So it drove me more into the work to which it's what it needed as well, right? It needed my attention to figure it out as soon as I could. But it wasn't the happy story it looks like now, for sure.
I think there's something interesting about when you have a child and just trying to start a business as well, isn't it? There's almost that sense of, I mean, I've had that with guilt. I've had resentment, like towards like trying to start a business, but there's that sense of weight. Like, I don't know, and dad's listening to this, you're trying to start your own business, you've just had a child, but you want to fulfill your creative output.
Yeah.
Like that can feel like I've got all this creativity in me. I want to start a business, but I've got a kid now, and it's there's so many different emotions that go on, isn't there?
Yeah, but you know what, Matt? The thing that drove me, like, 'cause I can say guilt because that's the first answer, and that is true, and then avoidance. But the thing that then brought me back to centre was knowing I wanted her to grow up watching me do something I loved.
That's cool.
And I do fucking love everything that I do. And she's 4 now, right? So she's getting some idea of it, and she's coming to watch me speak at Carfest on the main stage in the summer, first time. Because I've told her, like, Daddy's going to work. Because some weekends I'll do talks and stuff. So Daddy's going to work. What is work? And like, Daddy speaks on the stage. So she doesn't quite understand what that means. So at preschool, she told them, Daddy dances on the stage. And then they're guessing, am I in Magic Mike or something else? So I was like, I wish.
That kind of goes back to just previous to what you said before about like chasing numbers, you're working in the city, chasing deals and stuff. I mean, I've had a bit of that where you feel like, you know, when you get to a point in your life where you have enough money and you think finally everything will be all right. And then you get there and you realize it's not the thing at all. Why do you think, like, for men especially, that kind of chase of numbers, of metrics, maybe finances or, you know, weight on the scales, whatever it might be? Why are we so obsessed with numbers and a perception of value? Why do you think that's so important for men?
Well, mate, I don't think we're obsessed with numbers. I think we're driven to expand as much as we possibly can, right? But in the modern day, the story has been told that it's numbers driven. In the Western world, with money and jobs and societal expectations, that's what it looks like. But it's really expansion. So if I'm doing a goal setting exercise with anyone, I say get away from goals and start thinking about growth. So it's expansion. And also, like, I still love numbers, but in the sales world, it was an unhealthy obsession. Now I'm like, it's cool I like looking at the numbers and seeing that I've grown revenue year on year or whatever it is, but from a healthy position. Because I still want to win. I still want to take my kids to Disney and do all that stuff. But I think when there's loads of nuances to this. Like, generally speaking, our deepest fear is not being enough. So when you're in that feeling, especially if you're in jobs that you don't like with titles and limitations around you, then it feeds more into that need for numbers. And, you know, if you're on social media, it's likes and engagement and all that sort of stuff. But it's just a part of our human makeup. As the male, as the masculine, we've been there to provide and kill the dinner and catch the dinner, whatever it is. Like, it's just part of our animalistic nature as much as it is our need to expand and experience everything. But there's unhealthy and healthy and everything, and you have to find your version of that. Generally speaking, it's a feeling. So if you do something, you feel shit afterwards, you're probably in the unhealthy. If you do something, you feel good, uplifted, and expand afterwards, you're probably in the healthy. That's maybe quite a simplified way to answer it, but that's where I see it.
I think one of the, just to follow on from that, one of the kind of, you know, key innate inbuilt instincts for a lot of dads is this sense around your purpose and to self-actualize your purpose. And a lot of that, as you say, is kind of based around, you know, your masculine energy and providing, etc. And I've seen this, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that you kind of had your mind on that bigger picture for your purpose as a dad, even though you were setting up the business and there was, you know, this challenging environment that you were kind of working from home in. But you had this idea and this vision around the bigger purpose that you're working towards. And in many ways, in that situation, it might sound controversial to say it, but sometimes as a dad, and it feels like we're in this chaotic environment, we're like, okay, I need to do what's most important rather than what's most urgent in this situation. And sometimes that is to start building in terms of the hierarchy of needs in the pyramid, the security, the shelter, food, you know, all the things that allow us to get higher up that pyramid towards the top, which is self-actualization. And then we die. we achieved our life's purpose.
There's that playfulness again.
Sounds great.
I feel like because that's something that really resonates with me and Matthew and I have had these kind of conversations. You've got this vision, this purpose around you as an individual, as a man working towards, but baked into that is this idea, I think, of the hierarchy of needs, where, you know, we need to build the base, we need to build that that foundation of being a provider and shelter and food and security ultimately.
Yeah, and that's like massively heightened when you become a dad because you've never felt that outside of yourself before. So that threat thermometer is constantly heightened. So that's why it's so exhausting. And obviously we don't sleep.
Yes, we don't sleep.
So let's talk about. We're moving on to segment 2, by the way. Okay. So let's talk about the weekend that you and I met. So this was February 2020, just before COVID, just before lockdown, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So that's like, what, 4 or 5 months before my daughter was born.
Yeah. So I remember quite vividly that weekend because it was quite an impactful weekend for me. It was a men's retreat weekend, and there were breakthrough moments through many people in the group. I had a very unexpected breakthrough moment during our breath work. But we're not talking about that now. We're talking about you. I want to hear a little bit about your build up to that weekend and why and how you found yourself actually there doing what we did that weekend.
So I suppose I finished playing football, and not too long after I got back, again in the mindset of achievement winning, that's what led me into medical device sales. Because Matt, with your question earlier, like I googled what's the highest paying entry level sales job, and that's what led my behaviour.
Really? Is that how you got it? Okay.
Yeah, I went for like several interviews and managed to get one with Johnson & Johnson. In my interview, I put up a picture of SpongeBob SquarePants and said, I don't know anything about the NHS, but I'm a sponge, I'll learn. And they gave me the job. But I was well aware there was something under the surface that I hadn't really been given too much attention to. And so I had chronic fatigue, basically, not too long after I moved back from the US. And I think I'd lived in a persona for quite a while, particularly within the football realm. Going into that the unhealthy side of myself. And so I had this chronic fatigue. It was sort of forced upon me to slow down and pause and figure out what I wanted to do in my life. And that was an awful experience because it really did, for years, take away my social life. I had to stop playing football. And the only energy I did have, I put into working. But it led me on this journey of self-discovery. So I picked up different books that I never would have read. I went to breathwork classes and had pretty profound experiences and emotional release and all this stuff that I didn't really understand. And I was starting to understand more about spirituality. I'd gone to do a course on meditation, transcendental meditation, like a 3-day course where they teach you how to do it, give you a mantra. So I was practicing that twice a day, and I was basically being more introspective, turning inwards, which I'd never done before because I lived fully dictated by the external. And that's where it started. So that kind of led me to a couple of those retreats, and that one being one of them.
What are your kind of memories from that weekend personally?
I remember it being a good group. I remember it being maybe slightly less profound because we were in London. We were in Richmond, weren't we?
We were, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been like off grid at some of these things before. Yeah. And I'd been very vulnerable in some of them before. But I remember feeling like a really good group and a nice camaraderie and people being super open to it. And it's kind of it. I think David Birtwistle was there as well, who's great and went on to do great things. And Ben was there. It was just a continuation of the sort of work that I've been doing. But then that led me to when my daughter was born 4 months later to like a big sort of calling that was the next step, really.
You're kind of getting, to simplify things, getting your ducks in a row a little bit with your own self and,
Yeah. This was, mate. So you ready for some trauma? Ready for a trauma story, guys?
Ready.
So when I was 5 months old, my biological dad left. So I was told when I was 3, don't remember being told, but always remember the story and always knew that it was a fact. I was brought up by my dad, who brought me up as his own. He's my hero, saviour, but always knew this story. So always carried some version of it and pretty much hid from it. And I think that's what led to the chronic fatigue, actually. But because of that, I'd always been, unknown to me, like completely obsessed with the idea of being secure and having all my shit together before I had a kid. Which now I think about is fucking mental. Why did I quit my job 3 months after she was born? But I suppose that was a calling. So yeah, I was desperately trying to move through something that I'd ignored my entire life and finding it really fucking difficult. But until and failing probably, even during that weekend, probably failing too. And then it wasn't until she was born that was when it was really time to figure out.
why do you think so many men are now being drawn to these men groups, to these, like, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just aware of it now because I feel like I've done a little bit of work myself. So I'm kind of like the cold therapy, the meditation, the spirituality. It's got, I don't know, it's just feel like all of a sudden it's just gone, and it's like we've got all these little things that we can try. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, why are men suddenly, is it because we're talking about it more, that we're putting our hands up and it's okay to struggle? But what do you think it is that's kind of, like, men are showing their vulnerability now? They're okay to say that I'm scared, that I need help. Like, I think it's great. I think it's brilliant. But I'm just curious. Like, it's, why do you think so many men are drawn to this now?
So we've been suffering for so long and holding it all in for so long. And we're luckily the first era or the first generation that said, you know what, fuck it. I don't want to hold in this stored energy and pain anymore. Like, I want to just live and from my truth and be honest. And that's like a scary thing to do. And there's a lot of people that won't do that. But we're the first people who are like attempting to go on that journey of figuring it out. I think like on the micro, ice baths and all that just feel amazing and they're great. But we're also craving connection, like real connection on a deeper level. I did a retreat, hosted a retreat last week, and it was incredible. You know, 5 very, very wealthy, very accomplished business owners, but who are so disconnected from themselves, from others, from nature, because that's just the world that we live in. And you can have that level of success, but then you're sacrificing the only thing that really matters, which is the connection. Yeah. So bringing people back together, like, you know, we were talking about it that many generations ago, everyone would be sat around the fire together, telling stories, like chatting, like you'd know each other. Today, I don't know my neighbours either side of me that I live in. Whereas before, you'd know. Your kids would be playing down the park and you'd know that the other kids were there, were from that house, that house, that house. That family's quite nice. That
ball
one
through their window.
Yeah.
Like, sorry.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so interesting because I think, like, do you know what's funny? Like, I was cycling through Richmond Park this morning and I saw this giant back on a bike and I was like, fucking, I recognise that back. And it was Ryan Libby, who we had on the podcast. And I just had this moment, I saw him and put his hand, I was like, Ryan, it's great to see you. And I saw Max Wilcox, you know Max Wilcox?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, Max, I was like, guys, and as I was cycling away and I was just like, do you know what, it just started spiraling in my head. Since I've been a dad, like, I have realised I have disconnected myself from my friends a lot. And I just had this moment of, it just felt good. It was like, I met the boys, I've said a bit of a shit joke, and it was just like really, and I think it's so integral as men, like, to have that. I think when you become a dad, it's very easy to distance yourself from your friends. And I've noticed that as I've got older and as Rayleigh has got older, that it's so, so important. Again, it's kind of one of the reasons why we started this.
I think we kind of distance ourselves from a lot of things because, you know, and this is where the balance that I want to talk about comes in between being driven and being purpose-led, but finding the balance to still remain connected to family and friends, because it's a constant kind of juggle.
Well, it just shifts you into a different focus, doesn't it? Like, one of my favourite days was, having felt that lack of connection, was when we found out what Lyra's school was going to be. And I take her every Tuesdays, I take the day and I'm with her and she does swimming, gymnastics, and it's amazing. We get our time together. And there's lots of other parents who were there as well doing the same thing. And it was a sense of community. I was like, what was so good about today? I was reflecting on it. And it was because it all felt suddenly together like a community. We were all waiting for the same news to find out what school they were going to, about something that we all really cared about and were passionate about. So it's just it's a shift. Like, before we wanted to see our mates to talk about, I don't know, whatever we talked about, sports or whatever. It's just a shift. Now they're our focus. So you find other communities, but there's pressures that comes with that as well. But I think if you can lean into that and find the right groups who have same values and stuff as you can find it.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because of these, like, and if you're in your own business, you kind of feel like you've always got to be in your business and you've always got to be on social media, and it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by it. And there's like a sense of guilt when you disconnect from it. But I just thought, even just like today, I was like, that was really nice. Like,
so with your retreats, like you hosted this men's retreat last week, what are the men like when they show up versus what are they like when they leave?
Just super stressed, like probably verging on burnout. Yeah, super stressed, super overwhelmed, too much information coming in, a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight on the shoulders. And I was laughing about it because I was chatting with a friend this morning about it, and I was like, it was one of the easiest things I've done, because I get to do the sauna, I get to do the swim in the river as well, I get to do the grounding and the meditation with them. And it's very easy, it's gentle, just like simple things like just allow yourself to walk slowly. When was the last time you did that? You're taking a deep breath, even thinking about it now. Like when I lived in London, I basically ran everywhere.
Yeah, you
I wanted to get the next fucking tube.
Yeah.
If that's there, yes, I feel so good about myself that I quickly jumped in the doors before they shut behind me. I've won by 1 minute, and that's the mentality. Like, where are we rushing to? And I still do it now. And obviously, when you're passionate about things, you can fall into that quite easily. But it was just to let yourself literally walk slowly and just feel how that feels. Feel what your feet feel like on the ground. Feel the grass on your feet. And then we just walked and we found a patch of sun. I said, just sit down. We've got nowhere to go. Just sit down, just look at the sun, allow that sun just to be on your face. We don't allow ourselves any of these things because we're trapped in it. Maybe it is the numbers thing from your previous question. Like we're trapped in this mentality of what to do next. Well, that's great and it works really well sometimes, but also take a pause from that and let yourself not have to do anything. And the whole human being, not human doing.
I love this mindfulness check-in, and it is. I think I've found it useful to compartmentalize things. So, it's in any situation. You know, what do I need right now? Not what do I need to do, but what do I simply need right now in any kind of given moment? And sometimes it's completely to down tools. It's to walk away from the laptop. It's to get down on the floor with my kids and start rolling around. Or sometimes it's to walk on my own in the fields, or it's to get in an ice bath, or sometimes it's to change my state by jumping in the ice bath or doing some breath work, whatever it might be.
That's amazing, though, mate. You got to have a level of self-awareness to do that, because most people who are still trapped in the thought pattern will go, "What do I need? Well, I need to go and do that call or write that email now," because you're still in that. But to be able to come back intuitively, go, like, "Oh, I do need to walk by myself," or "I do actually need the ice bath," because that's an interesting one. Sometimes that's overstimulating as well.
So a lot of people are stuck in that doing trance, you know, and the stories in their head, and you know, we've all been there. We can go through a whole day, but you've never actually been truly present in any given moment, because you're darting forward and back with all this mental time travel as we do. But awareness, as you're saying, is the first step to creating a bit of space between recognizing that and then choosing action that serves you rather than reacting in a way that doesn't.
Sorry, just going back to these mental tricks, because I know very little about these. I find it really, really interesting.
Yeah.
How do you come up against the man that finds it a little bit fluffy and a little bit like, you know, my feet are on the ground, I'm walking, and like, because I think I would be like that. But I want
You would definitely be like that, man.
Yeah, I would. I would. But every single part of me doesn't want to be like that.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be like that. Because you'd get there and everyone else is doing it. And inside there's a knowing that you need to connect with nature. You need to connect with yourself. You need to connect with others. And you'd put your feet on the ground. The initial ego might go, "This is fucking weird." Like
that's what it is.
Like
it's
what
that
I
initial,
did. My first breathwork class, man, my ego was there going, wah, 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 warning signals going off. Get the fuck out of here, all these hippies, all this shit, get out of here. Because it was weird. They're all chanting, banging the floor and stuff. And I was like, this is really strange.
There's ones where guys just scream, isn't there?
This is it. And that's what it was. It was one of these ones. And I'm like, this is fucking strange.
Sign up to a Metallica concert.
But you've got to let yourself move past that, because it's all just a story. What's the story? What's the story you're telling yourself? And you'll get gold in that. The story
That's the thing.
is,
It'll be me lying there going, "This is just a bit weird.
Yeah.
This is just feels a bit uncomfortable."
But also, like, the big thing that I put a huge emphasis on is that I do marry the Eastern and the Western. Like, I'm not here to wear hemp shoes and I was going to say tie the man bun. I did have a man bun in lockdown, but like, you know, I'm not going full hippie. And I work with sports teams. I work with professional athletes and footballers and CEOs. I want to marry the both. And I'm that person. I'm the highly driven, highly strung at times person who needs to downregulate. Yeah. So I create them for that type of person who might find it a bit weird. And when that happens, we'll have a little bit of banter and laugh, and then you'll soften into it and you'll ease into it and you'll have a great time.
You're selling it to me, Mark. I like it. I like it.
Well, I showed up to Medicine Festival last year on day one.
Well, that is full hippie.
I mean, that's full hippie. I mean, I threw myself in the deep end, and I kind of showed up, and I could feel, you know, the stickiness of all of the stresses and the things that I had to be doing, and the conditioning of, you know, the modern world that we move in. And I arrived there, and the first thing I was like is like, fucking, I need a pint of cider or lager. Go to find one. Find out it's an alcohol-free festival. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Okay, because that was just my automatic reaction to downregulate, because we're all so used to that on a Friday after a busy week.
Loosen up.
Go and have a pint, loosen up, take the edge off. So I was forced in that environment not to do that. I was forced to wander off into the woods, and I found this gathering, and they were doing kind of impromptu sounds and movement and dance. So there was a lady in the middle who was stood on a log, slightly elevated, and there were about 20, 30 people gathered around, making all sorts of animal noises, swaying in different ways. And I was like, I'm just going to give this a bit of a go.
Like my old drama class.
Yes. And I was there, fully clothed. Stood at the back, head down. If you ever go to church and you kind of quietly murmuring the hymns instead of at the front belling them out, I was the guy at the back, just kind of just being very embarrassed. Fast forward to day 4. I was in the middle. My top was off.
Dick swinging.
I was like eye gazing strangers. I was like going for it, no inhibitions. And I felt lightness. I felt like I shedded all of the armor and all of this stuff that was sticking to me when I arrived. But the big telling point for me was on the very last morning as we were getting ready to go. We went to queue up for a mushroom coffee before we left.
Of course you did.
And there was a bit of a queue. And this mother and her daughter was at university, and the mother was slightly older. Like anyone would if you're in a queue for a coffee shop, would break into conversation. Now in London, I'd be like, 1 or 2 answer, reply, and then head down and get on with my day. We didn't move from the spot for about an hour, and we spoke in depth. We had real connection. It turns out that the mother had lost the father, and they've set up this retreat in the Midlands, and we spoke about all sorts of natural medicines, and it just went into this long, deep conversation. And I enjoyed every single second of connection with those 2 humans. And I know that if I'd been put in the same position on day 1 when I arrived, I wouldn't have been able to achieve that level of connection with them. So I think that these retreats, taking us up away from the environment that we're in and actively breaking down that armor that we put on, is a huge part of this work, and we do take it forward with us. So let's all go to Medicine Festival this year. Matthew, you'll come
Dance in the woods.
Yeah. I am very curious. Okay, so after the walking on the grass, so I don't mean to sound like, you know what I mean? I feel like I'm sounding like a bit of a twat.
No, you're not.
Because I'm like, after the walking, but I'm really curious. What happens after that? When is like the turning point that you start to see the real men and the real vulnerability? When does that come?
Different for different people. So I'll tell you the flow of the day. It was welcome drink, mushroom coffee, adaptogenic mushroom coffee.
Well, like these mushroom coffees, because I heard people like microdosing and stuff.
No, it's not psilocybin. It's like it's lion's mane and like these cognitive enhancing.
Okay. Yeah. What are the ones people are microdosing on? That apparently is like the really happy stuff.
I don't know.
Or the psychedelics and so on. I'm not an expert on that.
I don't know. Sounds good though.
Yeah.
Maybe for Mark when you come back, find out about that.
So the flows for me, it's easy, and everyone's got very busy lives. They're probably driven a couple of hours to get there, so it's easy. And grab a coffee, introduce yourself to one another, meet the other people, figure out that you're all very similar types of people. You're all running businesses. I always do it with people who are running businesses. Or the other group is professional athletes. So I'll keep the groups the same so that they resonate with one another on an energetic level. Meet each other. We'll have a little stroll around the area so they see the environment. Again, when we think about from a neuroscience point of view, the brain's only doing 3 things all the time. Like one of them is scanning for threat. And then it's predicting, do I have to do something for this threat? And then it's predicting what energy is it going to cost me to actually take that action to avoid the threat and survive. So when you can introduce someone to an environment properly, then it drops down a little bit and you're allowed to become more in the prefrontal cortex rather than the emotional state. So I'll have a walk around for that reason, really. I don't tell people that. I just say we're having a nice walk. And then we'll do some sort of coaching-y stuff, so more intellectual thinking, heady stuff, like a check-in, which gets them to internalise, probably for the first time they have done in a while, just to check in with where they're at. And I'll use my 7 equities exercise, which breaks the 7 areas where you can measure your life. What gets measured gets managed, so they can grade 1 to 10 the different 7 equities. Gets them to start thinking, okay, where am I really at? And if they're very low in their mindset and very low physically or very low spiritually or financially or any other area, then they're just starting to take stock of where they are. And then we'll start thinking, okay, what do you need to do then? Habits wise, behaviors, actions away from today, what's next for you to start to think about improving that? So then you're shifting their focus onto them to think about how they're going to take care of themselves and what's important to do next. Then we'll go and walk in the grass. But that's grounding, right? So it's not this hippie thing. It's just we put soles on our shoes and it stopped us having the natural healing from the ground. It's not like this magical thing. It actually is, but it's not as weird as it sounds. You're just walking in the grass, but the energetic healing powers that you get from that is wild. And we've missed it for so long. You can feel it. You just touch a tree and you can feel it. So we'll do that. And some people will feel something, some people won't. Some people will pretend they can, some people won't. But that's really, if it's doing nothing else, it's just dropping them to down.
What does it feel like when you feel something?
Charge, energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Frequency.
You'll just know.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
It feels like energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can see I'm asking.
Sorry,
well, because
I give me the giggles because I know.
Because this, me and Lawrence were very similar, but we're also very different. Like Lawrence is very connected with the outdoors and outside, and I want to be.
What does it feel like to you, Lawrence?
Yeah,
So,
what does it feel like to you?
When you ground?
I fully will say that during one of my recent walks, I held a tree and I felt.
Sorry.
See, you laughed. I got emotional. I got emotional because I felt I was tapping to something bigger than myself.
Yes.
I felt all connected with everything. And I felt like I have a role to serve in this universe that's bigger than myself, and that's to serve others, to serve nature.
Is that why you were fucking late the other day? Because you were hugging that tree?
Yeah, you're serving others.
So, and I probably wouldn't have got that. You can't, there's somewhere along the spectrum, from 0 to 100. You can't jump in some quantum leap to feeling everything. I think I've chipped away at it over many, many years. And I had breakthrough moments, like I had a breakthrough moment during the breath work on that retreat that we had. I didn't realize that I was going to purge myself of so much.
That retreat?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about that.
So just because like I'm very aware that when we talk about this, it is a dad's podcast. So people listen to this for like, what the fuck? But that's it, mate. We are connected to everything, and we are connected to a higher force, and it's only us that blocks that through our ego, through our personas that we put on based off of the stories we tell ourselves. So when we have the ability to drop that, whether it's hugging a tree or in a coaching session or just walking in the grass or just chatting with another person who has similar feelings to you, like you're actually getting closer to who you really are. If I distill down what I actually do, it's teaching people who they really are. And the way this sort of all links back into being a parent is you're forced to think for things outside of yourself and have a purpose outside of yourself with your children, right? So like to be able to access that through nature and in other situations, it does genuinely makes you a better parent, but it makes you a better human as well. So I think when you will feel that with your daughter, a purpose outside of yourself, so you know what that feeling is like, and you can get it on the retreat as well.
Okay, the breath work then, because I mean I've spoken openly that I struggled with postnatal depression. I really, really struggled with it, and I had this anxiety that built from me. I think probably since I found out that my wife was pregnant, something just changed in me. I felt this gut wrenching, and I had it for months and months and months. And then Lawrence, you spoke about this breath work that you did, and since I started therapy, it's actually gone. But since I could see why doing some sort of breath work, you said it just dispersed. Was that right?
Yeah, well, I think unbeknown to me, I didn't know anything about how my nervous system could upregulate and that, emotional stress can manifest itself physically within my body, but I would be carrying abdominal pain, and I would feel it very.
Yeah, that's exactly what mine was. Yeah.
But during this breathwork, my very first breathwork experience, I went into it not having any expectations of what would happen, but I went into it feeling quite desperate because of the chronic stress that had been building up, and there was now manifesting itself physically. So I was like, I'm going to go all in with everything. So I'm just going to be all in with this practice. I'm going to throw myself into it. And a combination of letting go, of really committing to the breath work and the environment. And I think also being in a room with other men who are on their own journeys, fighting their own battles and committed to their own healing as well, led me to a point of complete and utter, it was a combination of physical release. So that physical tension I felt in my abdomen was almost like a rippling release, very, very real, that I could feel release and dissolve. Yeah. At the same time, I felt a huge flood of emotion come from deep inside me. And I don't know if you remember, Mark, I was in floods of tears, like hysterical for quite a long time, and really couldn't understand why. I had a few flashbacks at the time. There were a few kind of visions that from my past that came through and visited me at that time. But it was like one huge big purging in which I was having both a physical reset because my nervous system was letting go of so much that it was holding on to. And then emotionally, it was like a purging where I was just releasing and letting go of certain memories that had been stuck to my subconscious and that were driving my day-to-day habits and actions that were causing me to be even more stressed because I was pushing myself, which in turn had this vicious cycle between my emotions and my body. So that's what happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what this breath work has done for me, I need to look into it further. And that's when I, started on my journey of exploring it and getting trained up in the rest of it. But
Amazing, mate.
That's a brilliant explanation.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, well, both of the things, it's a generalization, but both of the feelings that you've explained there in the abdomen, was it more like, was it high abdomen?
Yeah.
Yeah, solar plexus, it's inner child, basically. So basically, it's not basic at all, but inner child is all the stories and narratives and things that we've held from our childhood, which dictate our life largely from our unconscious, but the breathwork allows us to access the unconscious more, and it brings those memories and things to the surface. And in doing so, it can release it. You have to be open to letting that be released, and it's quite a powerful thing. But
do you think it's better doing something like that for the first time in a group environment with men rather than trying to do it by yourself?
I think it's individual. I think for me, I would go and do like a one-to-one with someone. That's what I would do. I feel safest like with my daddy issues and all that stuff. I'd rather just have, one person, preferably a woman. I hate authority still.
You're not telling me how to breathe.
You can't tell me anything. But seriously though, again, like knowing yourself, that's what's important. Like know what works for you, know what doesn't. Like if you know you're sensitive to certain things, then you can work with that to still help yourself.
Yeah.
But for me, it would be a one-to-one. It depends on what your stories are and what your things are that you hold in you that would be the best support.
You're selling it to me, lads. Can I just ask, we are running slowly out of time, but we've spoke a bit about purpose before. What advice would you give to any man who is struggling with his purpose at the moment? Yeah,
thanks. That's a great question. I think the biggest thing with purpose is there's this myth that we have to go and find this purpose, and we're chasing this illusion of the thing that's going to make us feel purposeful, and this big all-encompassing life purpose, and it's fucking nonsense. One of the first things that I teach people on purpose is that it's already inside of you. You know what it is. There's an inner knowing, and there's a sense of what's purposeful, what's meaningful to you, and we can make that super simple by saying, what's your purpose for this gym session? You might be probably training chest or buys or something, but do you know what I mean? There's a purpose in that, right? That's obviously a superficial version, but everyone has a purpose inside of them already. We're so fortunate that if we rewind the clock back to tribal times, no one said, what's my purpose? They all had a very clear purpose, and the overarching purpose was to survive. Now, we're the most comfortable we've ever been in society. As a species, we're the most comfortable we've ever been. And as a result, we're now lost. We don't know what to do. But we actually, rather than seeing it as a problem, we have the fortune to go, well, I fucking create it for myself. My purpose is to enlighten people to a different way of living and then empower them to go and do it. That is what I've decided. And that's what I feel so in tune with and connected to. And I get to do that with amazing people, and I get to talk about this stuff every day, and it's unbelievable. I love it, but I created that for myself. I felt it in here, and through all the journey that I've been on, I really believe that I was meant to walk those steps. I was meant to experience those things, as painful as they were, and that's led me to where I am now. And everyone has a version of that. You guys have a version of that. Everyone listening has a version of that. Whatever you've walked, your steps, your journey is a part of what your purpose is, and that's a felt sense. And then that's what you can go on and give to the world. But I also think you have to lean into the calling, lean into the lessons, lean into the things that feel difficult, but they are your lessons. That's your education, your path to walk. And in doing so, that's your purpose.
I 100% agree.
I love that. What an answer.
It's so good.
That's so good.
I think the harder you look for it, and the more you force it, the more resistant energy pushes it away, the more you become into alignment with yourself. And
that's presence.
Yeah.
Fucking let go of the wheel.
Yeah.
Let go of the wheel. Yeah. Stop trying to control everything. I know now that the beauty is in the uncertain, it's in the unknown. And that sounds like a quippy little quote from somewhere. And back in the day, I would have said, yeah, the beauty is in the unknown, and not really grasped it. But now I know the amount of things that I've done, the beauty is when you let go. Even a great example is when I deliver a talk. When I first started doing public speaking, I would practice word for word. And in my mind, it was like, that's how it's going to go. I'm even going to pause there. They're going to laugh then. And then I'm going to say this bit or whatever it was. But very quickly, I realized the best parts of the talk were unrehearsed. They were on the spot, just intuitively came through in the moment. And
everybody's got a plan until they're punched in the face, right? So it's like that.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
unexpected is,
But then you need to know what to do when you've been punched in the face as well. So if it does fall shit, then what you're going to say next, because that also gives you some confidence too.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that. I honestly feel like we could talk all day, Mark. And
Joe, when's your next retreat?
Yeah, can we all?
Will you come with me?
100%. Just because I want to see you.
Love to.
Hugging those trees, Matthew, and walking barefoot. So, Mark, finally, if people want to find you and your work, where's the best place to look online?
So the podcast still is there. I'd probably only do like 4 or 5 episodes a year, but really good ones. So that's there. Take Flight Podcast on all podcasting platforms. Take Flight World is the website. So takeflightworld.com. Take Flight World Instagram account. Mark Whittle _TF is my personal Instagram account for all coaching stuff, all retreats, and anything else as well.
Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, for your honesty, your vulnerability. And, you know, I'm somebody I feel like I need a bit of selling on this, and you've been the best guy. You know, you used to work in sales, so he's got me. He's got me.
Thanks for coming on, Mark.
No, thanks,
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.